I think, you know, everybody has many different personas, and Plastic Man is just one way to me to delve into one part of my psyche or one part of my head and come up with a certain sound, a certain texture, a certain atmosphere. I think the Plastic Man is more of a feeling, more of an atmosphere than a specific sound.
So the reason, I guess you talked to Ken about it.
Briefly, but my life's been really crazy for the last month finishing the album, so you should give me a little bit of a full background and everything right now. And tell me if, is it still better? Okay there? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Check? Okay.
And this is an independent...
And you're recording now, right?
Yeah.
The red light, okay.
This is an independent documentary about audio engineers and producers as well. People in the industry that work with, work behind the scenes recording. So I just want to start...
Like electronic people or all different types of people?
All different types. You're the only electronic person.
Who else have you talked to?
I talked to Dave Bottrell, Steve Albini, Bob Weston, Calvin Johnson, Larry Crange, and Garth Richardson.
I don't know all these people, but I know some of them. So.
Yeah, some of them.
Yeah.
And this guy named Elvis.
Elvis, cool.
Elvis.
Good. Okay.
And this other Pro Tools guy. So that's it so far. So anyway, the reason I wanted to add you into it is this is what I start with. I think it's important to stress the creativity of your process to other engineers because there's still such a lack of comprehension surrounding the act of DJing and just, you know, composing electronic music. There's still that little kind of taboo I find with a lot of engineers. There's still look at it as you're spinning other people's music. You know, you know, they don't take it seriously. So I wanted to kind of show your side of it.
Okay.
Just to teach those people.
Yeah.
It's valid.
No, totally.
So if I want to start with the roots a little bit, with where you came from. I know that your dad was a GM technician, robotics technician. I find that so interesting how that kind of came about with your style.
One other question. Do I need to like try? Are you using your voice on this at all? Do I need to like kind of reiterate the question or anything like that, or just start talking?
Don't worry about anything. Just talk.
Just go.
I just work with it later, so I'm not worried about my vocals.
Okay.
But what I'll do is I'll just pull out different issues from everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
So, don't worry about anything.
It's informal.
Just completely
I
cash.
I know, totally.
Completely, you're not used to it.
No, I just, my dad, a robotic technician, totally. My dad was always like, before we were moving to Canada, he wasn't a robotic technician. He was just working as an electrician and stuff, but he was always interested in electronics. And when I was a kid, he was building his own computer. It actually never worked. He threw it across the room and broke it because he got so frustrated trying to build his own computer. But this was like the first, you know, where my dad was coming from, and he was always having a lot of like high-end hi-fi components. And you know, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I was always playing with small reel-to-reel tape machines, you know, kind of like the stuff that my dad had thrown away because he had just upgraded to some new things. So that was kind of the background of when I was a kid growing up. You know, it was more so my dad was into toys. He was always buying things for him and for me, and sometimes for my brother. And sometimes they were as much for us as they were for him. So it was always weird electronic sounds, gizmos, and images of when I was a kid. Remembering him looking and seeing my dad sitting in front of his stereo with big headphones on, listening to music. I always remember this, and even the music he was listening to was somewhat different, I guess. He was always, you know, he was into things like Tangerine Dream and you know, I was finding my first Kraftwerk album in my dad's collection, you know,
Wow.
Pink Floyd, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, I wouldn't say I'm a big Pink Floyd fan, but, you know, that's the kind of, that was always in the background, even when I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
This weird kind of soundtrack was going on. So for sure, I think all those things have or had an effect.
So when did you move to Detroit? Were you a little kid?
I moved to Windsor when I was 9 years old, like 9.5. So I you know, Detroit was really, it wasn't part of my upbringing, I guess, until probably 12 or 13 when I started to remember, like, you know, we were going, you know, if you wanted to go shopping, you know, if you wanted to go to movies or anything a little bit more than Windsor offered, you always went to Detroit. So even, you know, and there was always two types of people in Windsor. There was the people who were afraid of Detroit because it was dangerous and it was at that time the murder capital of the world. Or you had people who really were like, it was like an extension of Windsor. You know, it was like Windsor is sometimes considered a suburb of Detroit. And my parents, although they knew that you didn't want to be in the wrong section of Detroit at the wrong time, they were open to going there. And so we went there really when I was like a teenager, when I was still hanging out with my parents on weekends. I remember most weekends going to toy stores or the mall or somewhere in Detroit. So it was really never this barrier for me. It was never like this big border. It was always like just an extension of where we lived. And when I started to get a little bit older, when I was, you know, 15, 16, Detroit became the place where I could find different things that everybody else in Windsor was, you know, buying or what they were into. You know, if you wanted to go beyond the typical movie, beyond the one small resale shop or the small alternative record shop, you went to Detroit. You know, we had all these places like Cinderella's Attic. We'd all go with my friends and we would buy like vintage clothes. Would go and find like, you know, the craziest records and all this. And then that slowly moved into having a lot of friends from Detroit and then starting to go to the early clubs in Detroit. And yeah, it's after a while, like when I was like 16, 17, it really started to become like I had two personalities or a split life. I was at school in the day and having my like after school job in Windsor. And then other than that, most of the other time, if I wasn't sleeping, I was hanging out in Detroit, you know, causing trouble.
So did you have a hard time breaking through? Yeah, I guess it must have been a easy flow to break through into that Detroit scene.
Yeah, it was really like organic, and it just kind of flowed together. I went from a kid hanging out in Detroit to a kid hanging out in Detroit at nightclubs to, you know, it was, you know, at this time in Detroit, the whole electronic scene and the club scene wasn't that big. So it wasn't really like, well, you're from, what's that?
What year would that be?
This was like probably 80, maybe 86 when I was like 16.
So
86, 87. Just on the edge of it. Yeah, just the beginning. And so it was really, it was so small that it didn't really matter if you're black, white, gay, straight, Windsor, Detroit, or no one really asked those questions. It was like you were into this little micro scene, which was in between alternative and industrial and what was starting to be called house and techno. It was all kind of the same. It was like electronic, and it was, I guess it was nearly just alternative. You know what I mean? It was what was different than what everybody else was into. And that just kind of like slowly led to going to more clubs, finding out that, you know, I was really interested in music more so than the other people. You know, we were all into music, but it started to become even more of a passion and a little bit more, you know, really a big part of my life. And, you know, and as this was happening, I was, you know, going to these clubs, meeting the DJs. Some of the DJs happened to be making records, you know, and suddenly I was meeting people like Derek May. And, you know, one of the first guys I met who was really influential for me in the beginning was Blake Baxter, because he was playing at a thing called the Majestic Theater. And I was there like every Friday for 1 year. I was just like one of the kids on the dance floor freaking out, you know, so.
Do you feel most of your roots are based in the U.S. and the UK as well?
I don't know. I feel like the whole roots of what got me interested in everything was a bit of a mishmash, because everything was at the time I was coming into the scene, everything was really starting to happen on an international level. It wasn't just Detroit. It was like, I guess I said sometimes that I was influenced or inspired as much from the Detroit and Chicago sound as I was from the echoes of what that sound did to everybody else in the world. Because I was finding these Detroit records in Chicago, New York records, but I was also hearing the first European versions of these people who had been inspired by these Detroit records. So things were coming back to us in Detroit from England. You were hearing the first like German techno records, the kind of the crossover between what was called in Belgium New Beat, and of course we were here listening to Kraftwerk, all this. So it was really, I think I was always having a little bit more of a worldwide perspective. It was always bigger than just Detroit.
So now it must be huge because you're traveling all the time.
Yeah. I really, it's, you know, there's definitely like pockets now. There's Berlin. There's
like maintains that one kind of style when you do that.
Yeah, well, that's what's cool about it. There's so many different styles and pockets of influences and little kind of clans of people working together and working on like-minded musical ideas now that it's really hard to like really pinpoint and say this is the most important place or this is exactly where this is coming from. You know, there's a Cologne sound, but then that inspires the Detroit sound, and then that inspires the Berlin sound. And then you get these crazy records from Tokyo. It's, you know, it really is. I know there's so many, you know, music is really, you know, worldwide, but I think electronic music is really, maybe it's changing a little bit now, but was really the first music that was really somewhat unified across the planet. You know, it was people were really communicating. It was when I think electronic music was also using the internet and all these things early on to really create a community. And I think a lot of other forms of music are now seeing that happen. But I think it was really kind of happening first on the electronic scene.
So did you develop the Final Scratch with John Aquaviva? Did you do that together?
Yeah,
how did that work?
Final Scratch was like developed by some hackers in Holland. But John and I kind of came on board in the very early stages and were able to, you know, be part of the I guess a team that kind of figured out how to make it something viable. Not only like a viable business, but really like a viable, I hate the word product, but a viable, something that people would actually use. You know, like the idea of, you know, these guys and these hackers were really doing like, we're on a challenge to each other. They're like, hey, can we make some way of controlling an MP3 with a record? And once they figured it out, and they were like, yeah, we can do that. It was nearly like,
kind of
let it go. But it was like, no, this could really change what we're doing. This could be, really developed. And of course, it's a product now, but like in the early days, it was, you know, for John and I think it was like nearly like finding a new artist with a cool new record. You're like, man, this is a cool, you need to finish this track. It could be huge. It's so cool. And before you even think about products or releasing a record or money or making a hit or whatever, it's just like, this is cool. We got to be part of this. Let's do it. And that's kind of how it was for Final Scratch. Hey, let's get this done so we can use it in a club.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we started using it, and it was like, then you have investors and these people, and everyone's like, wow, this could be cool. This could be a product. This could be the, and then it's like, but you know, it's been one of the most amazing things to be part of. Like seeing something beyond a record go from an idea to like walking down to, like I was walking. Like you don't walk in Canada or in America, you drive and then you walk, right? So I was driving to a music store and then walking into the music store a couple of weeks ago, about 8 blocks from my house in Windsor, and there on the shelf is Final Scratch. And I was like, wow, like it's like 3 years
everywhere.
And here it is. It's tangible. I could pick it up and buy it. It was really weird.
Can you explain a little bit just for people to understand what it is? Just
yeah. Well, the idea, you know, like I said, the idea was to somehow make an interface to control digital files, and of course, the interface that all DJs know is using a turntable, a record, you know. And there's a couple of important things about using a record, and you know, being able to put your hand on it and not only scratch but kind of cue up a point, being able to drop the needle in any place and find, you know, be 2 minutes into it, 5 minutes into it, 10 minutes into the track, you know, figuring out a way to make that happen with a digital file. And that's what Final Scratch really does, using a special Final Scratch record, which is a regular piece of vinyl. The turntable gets linked up to a computer, and basically what's happening is the computer is listening to every record you're playing. And when you play a normal record, it just ignores it, and the normal record plays just like ever, and you hear the music that's on that record. But when you put a Final Scratch record on, the computer picks up that there's a special time code on that record, and it uses that computer information to figure out exactly what is happening, where the needle is on the record, whether it's 2 minutes into the record, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whether the record is going faster or slower than it should, whether the record's going frontwards or backwards. And then it takes that information and maps that onto the MP3 or the digital file of your choice. So suddenly you have this really amazing interface between the analog and the digital world.
Right.
And that's what John and I were just freaking out about. And it goes beyond, I think, just the idea of the record player. I think it's been a really big step forward to bridging that analog digital divide.
That's one of my questions. Is do you feel that it's like, though it's fully digital,
Yep.
right? So is it bridging, like, is it a
The
bridge
gap?
for people to take the leap from analog to digital?
Yeah, for sure. Like I don't think Final Scratch is definitely not, even when we first saw it, it was never going to be the end all discussion on playing digital files. But we as human beings are used to working with things in a physical way, whether it's using a toothbrush to brush your teeth, or using a video camera to record someone, or using a record player to play music. And Final Scratch was the first thing that really enabled us to bridge that gap, to control this new digital medium with an analog way that we were used to. And again, it's important for DJs, for musicians, but I think this is like the question that everyone is like asking now, like, how do we interface ourselves with the new digital world? So it's some people are talking.
Rejecting it, so.
Yeah, some people are. People think that we're losing things.
They have this kind of nostalgia about analog.
Yeah, but on every level of our lives, of the community that we're involved in, everything is changing. It's we used to go to the police station to take fingerprints. Now you do like digital fingerprints or eye scans. You used to do your signature to prove who you are, and now that's slowly starting to cross again into this type of like security thing. So, of course, at every step of the way, you possibly lose something. But I'm always a believer in that you probably gain more than you lose. And as long as you gain more than you lose, then I think it's an interesting and a viable technology.
Oh, I wanted to talk about just the tactility of the records as well. Like, you're not going to be using records, so like just having it as a turntable still. How does is that why you kept it that way? Just so
I think there's two ways to look at it. There's not only the performer who has to worry about how to interact with the technology. There's also the audience who have to watch and know what they're doing. It's why the guitar and regular bands have been so popular over the last decades, I think, is because people understand the language of the performer. They understand that, when the drummer hits, it makes a sound. When the guy plucks, it makes a sound. And for a while, people were watching DJs, and still people are like this. They watch DJs and like, well, the guy's only playing other people's music. He's just playing records. It's so boring. Yeah. But it's only boring until you familiarize yourself and understand what that performer is doing. So for us, we spent the last 15 years doing these tricks. You watch me, I'm playing the record, I'm playing with the EQ, and there's a physicality about it that I understand and everybody else understands. And to say that, okay, well, now we use digital files, and if we throw all that physical stuff away, no one's going to understand what it's going to be again. Well, this is really boring. Yeah, and it's also boring. So Final Scratch enables us to have all this new possibility, control all this digital stuff, but still do all this physical stuff that everyone loves. And again, it's not.
You're probably used to it as well. That's what you want.
Well, yeah, for sure. But I really have to stress that I only think it's a bridge technology. I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life.
Right.
I'm already in discussions with people and companies and looking at what's next. You know, I don't want to use a turntable for the rest of my life because now, you know, it was the bridge to enable us a whole bunch of other options on the digital side. But now I think that it's nearly holding us back because we can only interact with a turntable so much. So now it's like, now what kind of controller can we use that will have a physical interaction that's interesting for me and the audience and give us even more potential of controlling digital files in a different way. So, and not even
So
digital
are these
files.
people looking to you to actually develop that now?
Well, I think there's a number of artists who who have done things which shows that they're interested in progressing their craft and interacting in new ways with the way things are being digitized. I think my use of Final Scratch along with John Aquaviva's and anyone else is using it shows that, okay, we like turntables, but we're interested in where we can go. You know, we don't want to just be tied down to what we've been doing for the past. Yeah, you have to progress. And I mean, this is the one mostly interesting thing with electronic musicians and electronic artists or media artists, people who are using computers. Most of them are progressively minded people. They've come up through the ranks, looking for new ways of working, of creating. And I think those are the people who will hopefully be involved in coming up with new ways of working in the
A
future.
lot of them I speak to, they always talk about the limitations. They enjoy that. It gives them a challenge to actually, push that envelope.
No, I think limitation. I think as humans we have to have limitations.
Yeah.
So, and it's a really an interesting way to find to have a dynamic to push your own ideas, find out how you can to kind of get around those limitations and come up with new ways. It's also like, what are the limitations now? What else are we going to do? As soon as something new comes along, it's going to get rid of some of the limitations, but it's also going to give us a whole new set. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. It's an interesting thing to keep our brains fresh and to keep us moving forward and also having fun. One of the reasons I like electronic music is because it's progressive.
I've always loved it.
Every time I get bored, someone else has released a new piece of software or someone's making a new song or this and that. And there's this constant push, this constant challenge.
Can you talk about Plastic Man versus Richie Hawtin? Like just the two personifications that you have. Because a lot of people have confusion over how you're supposed to distinguish.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's an easy explanation, but I think everybody has many different personas, and Plastic Man is just one way to me to delve into one part of my psyche or one part of my head and come up with a certain sound, a certain texture, a certain atmosphere. I think the Plastic Man sound or whatever is more of a feeling, more of an atmosphere than a specific sound, because some of the albums sound similar, then you have Consumed and other albums which sound quite different, but I think there's an overriding atmosphere in them all. And I don't know, it's a hard one.
Did it come out of the plastic parties that you used to have?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, we were doing a lot of parties in Detroit in the early 90s that were really, the idea about them was really to take away a lot of the stimuli for the senses, really do these black box rooms which really were all about sound and sound isolation and what you can do with those frequencies and things like that. And the early ideas for the Plastic Man albums were really coming from that, really about kind of closing your eyes and kind of going inward to yourself and kind of really having this trip and having a musical soundtrack to that. And that's what the albums were always about.
So it's personal.
Yeah, I think all the albums were personal, and but also had enough room to give people their own individual trip. I never wanted to have it so written out that it was like, okay, here's exactly what I want everybody to hear and think about. I like, that there's some kind of
well, it's giving.
It's giving, and it's I think people should have room to move within their music and within any kind of art form. So there's a personal interaction with it. I think it draws people closer.
something. Whatever happened? I find that interesting how you were banned from the States for 18 months. I guess that was a long time ago. But
Yeah, well, that wasn't. Would you say for 2 months?
18 months.
Yeah, 18 months. It was a long fucking time.
Just a bum.
Yeah, yeah, that kind of sucked. But yeah, I was banned, with problems due to working there without the right paperwork
Right.
and stuff. And
How did you get busted?
well, I was on my way to do a live performance the day after the Oklahoma City bombing,
Oh,
and one, they didn't appreciate all the equipment I had in the back of my car because they were like, "What the hell are you bringing over?" Two, I was bold, cleanly shaven. I didn't look the right. I looked exactly like, yeah, really everyone they were looking for at that moment in time. So it was really bad timing, and yeah, at the end of the day, it was catch-22 because I was doing something which I wasn't supposed to be doing. I was working there consciously without the right papers, but I had gone and tried to go. I was in the process of trying to get the right paperwork, but no one would give them to me because I was only classified as a DJ, and to get the right kind of paperwork to work in the States as an artist, as a musician at least, you needed to be a musician, and they wouldn't classify me as a musician because I was only playing other people's music.
really?
Yeah, and so over
So what
time,
would you be?
what's that?
What would you be? Like, what was your category?
Well, there was no category.
So
That's why they wouldn't give me my paperwork. They were saying anybody can be a DJ. You're coming in and you're taking away a job for an American, so they wouldn't give me. I couldn't prove to them that I was doing that a DJ could be something creative, whereas I was an artist or a musician that was so individual that I wouldn't be taking away from anyone in the States. Of course, it's changed now.
It's still pretty stinky that way, though.
Well, if you go through the right channels, they understand what the DJ is now. So it has changed. And by the time I was busted, part of the 18 months was not only explaining to the government what I was doing, but also the government finally coming to an understanding that a DJ was a viable artistic profession that should be allowed to come into the States.
Finally. Is that when you did Consumed?
No, Consume was done in '98, but Consume was definitely inspired by those events because during my exile or whatever, however you refer to it, I was recording a year-long project called Concept One, and this was probably the most experimental, long-form project that I've done in my career or whatever. But it was really kind of like, I'd spent so many years doing Plastic Man. I really wanted to experiment with some new ideas, new sounds, and have the freedom really to do whatever I wanted. Plastic Man at that time had got a little bit confining because people were now starting to like, well, Plastic Man should be this and that. And I was like, fuck you. This is ridiculous. Electronic music should never be confining. So if the audience, I felt like, well, if my audience is confining a certain name, then screw it. I'll work on something else. Experiment with some new ideas, and those ideas became Concept One, and that kind of inspired and kind of was the breeding ground for the ideas that ended up being a Plastic Man album called Consumed. So,
Can you clarify the labels, the Nova Mute and +8 minus?
yeah,
It's just a little bit cloudy for me.
yeah, it's a bit all over the place. Well, Nova Mute is a label that I work with for any of the projects that I do that I feel have a bigger potential than I could possibly do on my own label.
Would that be like overseas?
Yeah, overseas, even in America, Nova Mute helps with all the Plastic Man releases because, my labels, +8 and Minus, are my own, my own independent labels. John Aquaviva doesn't have a part. +8 was created with John, but John has since kind of left to do his own thing. So at the moment, +8 and Minus are kind of my own things. Clark, who you met earlier, is my label manager, but there's only like 3 or 4 of us at the label. So we can put out a record, we can do our 5, 10, 15,000 copies, but if we really want to take it to a bigger level with a full promotion team, with full, the whole 9 yards, the photos, like to do it, to really do it, we need a partner to be able to help us with that, and that's what Nova Mute is. So that's kind of the difference between them and us. And for Minus and Plus 8, really the way that works now is Plus 8 is really a label for electronic, I guess forward-minded electronic music, but it's really for the dance floor. Whereas Minus is for a little bit more subtler ideas, things that don't necessarily work on the dance floor. It's all rhythmically based for sure, but I think you put a needle on a Plus 8 record and it's going to be really upfront in your face. This is really going to work. You know, put this on middle of the night, people are going to freak out. And Minus, I think everything we put out on Minus can be danced to, but I don't think everybody else would have that perspective.
So what are you going to play tonight? Like, what kind of, are you using Final Scratch?
Tonight will be the kind of the newest generation of what I'm doing for my DJ performances, which is Final Scratch. I'm also using another computer, another app, a Macintosh, running a program called Live, which does all this kind of looping, enables me to kind of resample things and deconstruct records even more so than Final Scratch. And I also use another sampler, some effects processors, and I'm also using a customized mixer. Even the DJ mixer is totally like my dad and I ripped it apart and rebuilt it from scratch. So everything's pretty. It's pretty specific right now what we're doing.
So it's Richie Hawtinized.
Richie Hawtinized, yeah. We call it. We're referring to it now as the CTRL system, like the control system. We're trying to get to a point that gives me as much control as possible to physically interact with all the sounds and songs and sound files and records and everything that I'm playing. So it's kind of how can we put it all through the grinder and spit something out in the other end that I'm going to like, the crowd's going to like, and that can be done spontaneously in a live performance. You know, I don't like to do too much work before I actually stand up in front of the crowd. I like it to be as spontaneous as possible.
So it's live.
So it's live, yeah. You know, there has to be some type of, live element. There has to be an interaction where, whether people understand fully exactly what I'm doing, that they get the idea that what I am doing is being created right then.
Well, that's another reason why I chose to talk to you, because I want to show the other engineers that it's not just you putting on 2 records. And
Yeah.
I want to show, like, maybe not necessarily other DJs do this, but you definitely you do live mixing.
Yeah, well, it's I think there's most top class DJs, even when they're just playing 2 regular records without any of the other technology, they're still they're still musicians or artists in their own right, because it takes something to know how to put 2 pieces of music together, whether you made them or not, in a way that it becomes something else, something that it never was intended to be. And I just take that to the extreme and have a whole bunch of other shit up there that enables me to do more with it. I don't want to be, I want to just be able to do something which is technically interesting, emotionally interesting, and what's the word? Entertaining. I also, as much as I get up there and I play and I get into my own little world sometimes, and I forget that there's 100 or 500 or 10,000 people in front of me. You have to remember that you're also an entertainer.
Yeah.
So, and so combining all those different ideas together, hopefully, the ideas, the technology, the spontaneity, somewhere that all comes together and creates something interesting.
I think the audience that comes to see you comes because they want that experience.
Yeah, hopefully.
Because they know that when you're gonna do a show, it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, well, nothing. People don't remember things. Well, they do, but people really don't remember things that are mundane or remember things that were expected. They remember the unexpected event in their lives. They remember something that really made a mark on them personally. Or even if they go to a show they remember when the guitarist or the DJ or the electronic musician does a slightly different version of their song. You know, people go to see, you know, even, well, maybe I won't say Rolling Stones because that's on a totally different thing. But like, you know, when I was a kid and I was going to see New Order or Nitzareb or Echo and the Bunnymen, yeah, I wanted to hear my favorite song. But I remember when they were playing something wrong, or they were doing a slightly different version, or the drums were too loud. I remember the wrong things, or the experimentation, or the fuck ups. And you know, when I play, I've got all this stuff going. It fucks up, you know, whatever. That's what I remember.
Process.
Yeah, it's totally part of the process, and part of the attraction of something that's live. So cool.
I think I covered mostly everything.
Cool.
Oh, the only thing that just one more thing that I have. Do you think Final Scratch will open the doors to some artists that might not be signed? Like, they can have their music that's on.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm a big supporter of digital distribution and the whole internet with file sharing and everything. You know, I really think it's a positive thing at the end of the day. And Final Scratch for sure. It's, you know, artists who are, you know, if you have to look at electronic music started by empowering the individual. It made technology affordable and music affordable. People started going from $200,000 studios to like 100,000 to 50,000, and now can really do it on $1,000 laptop, or even a $500 laptop. But one of the bottlenecks of that was, yeah, it's great. A kid can make a piece of music, but how's he going to get it played in a club? They have to make a record. But now, throw that out of the window. If they can get that digital file to a DJ who has Final Scratch, then if that DJ likes it, they can play it. You know, and they don't even have to meet them. They can email it. You know, during my sets, not every night, but, you know, there's, you know, I was in Gijón, which is south of Spain. Anyway, I was in Spain yesterday or something. And in the middle of my set, I was playing like 2 tracks that were like destroying the crowd of like 4,000 people. And both of those tracks, I have no idea if or when or if ever they'll ever be released. One was from a friend in New York who just started making music and sent me a CD. And the other guy was a friend from Montreal who sent me a couple of tracks on email.
Did you let them know?
Yeah, they're both, you know, one of the guys knows I'm always playing the track. I've been playing for a couple of months, and I was telling my friend in New York about it, and he was like, you know, freaking out, you know, like he just started making music on a computer. He's sitting in New York hoping that maybe one day he can do this and make a living out of it and have it part of his, as such a part of his life as maybe perhaps it is for me. And he's finding out that this track that he created at home in New York was played out, and 4,000 crazy Spaniards were freaking out to it. So, you know, technology definitely is democratizing music and distribution and the whole idea of creativity. It's unbelievable. Cool. Thank you.
Cheers. Tape's almost done anyways.
Cool.